July 14th, 2026, 2:47 a.m. 11 Russian cargo vessels moving through the Sea of Azov in tight convoy formation, hugging the northern coastline between Mariupol and the Kerch Strait. Their captains believed the night would protect them, believed their electronic warfare escorts would blind any threat, believed the corridor was safe. By dawn, 8 of those vessels were burning, drifting, or taking on water. The Azov Corridor. Russia's most critical logistics lifeline from Rostov-on-Don to occupied Crimea went dark for 72 hours. And the world woke up to something it hadn't seen before. Ukraine had deployed algorithmic drone swarms at sea, and Russia had no answer. I'm your host at Steel Horizon, where we analyze the battles that change wars. This is the story of Operation Silent Azov. 3 nights, 11 vessels, and the most sophisticated unmanned naval assault in the history of modern warfare. What happened across those 3 nights wasn't just a strike. It was a demonstration. Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate, the GUR, had spent 4 months preparing a response to Russia's most protected supply route. They anticipated every Russian countermeasure: electronic warfare jamming, GPS spoofing, thermal decoys, and engineered around all of them before the first drone ever hit the water. The answer to how they did it involves algorithmic targeting, distributed AI coordination, and an optical guidance system that Russian EW operators never saw coming. But before we get to the drones, we need to understand why this corridor mattered, and why Ukraine was willing to burn months of development work to seal it. The Sea of Azov sits northeast of the Kerch Strait, an enclosed body of water Russia has treated as a private lake since the full-scale invasion began. After the fall of Mariupol in 2022, Moscow established what it called a secure maritime corridor running along the northern Azov coastline, a route for cargo vessels carrying fuel, ammunition, construction materials, and military equipment between the Russian mainland port of Rostov-on-Don and the occupied territories of Crimea and southern Ukraine. By mid-2026, this corridor was moving an estimated 60,000 to 80,000 tons of cargo per month. Ukrainian General Staff analysis assessed it as responsible for approximately 35% of Russia's overland equivalent supply capacity to forces in southern Ukraine. Ukrainian OSINT teams and satellite imagery analysts had been tracking the corridor for over a year. They knew the convoy schedules. They knew the vessel types: primarily converted civilian cargo ships, aging grain tankers repurposed for military logistics, and several purpose-built Russian military supply vessels with hardened hull sections. They knew the Russian Navy maintained 2 Raptor-class patrol boats as escorts on most runs, and that Anapa-based electronic warfare systems, specifically Krasukha-4 and Pole-21 complexes, provided electromagnetic coverage over a roughly 40-kilometer bubble around active convoys. That EW bubble was the problem, and for most of 2025, it worked. Earlier, Ukrainian USV operations in the Sea of Azov had mixed results. 3 attempted strikes between November 2025 and February 2026 saw Ukrainian surface drones disrupted by GPS spoofing before they could close to terminal guidance range. The drones were navigating using GPS waypoints, and the Russian jammers were flooding those frequencies with false positioning data, pushing the USVs off course by 2 to 4 kilometers, enough to miss the convoy entirely. Ukrainian drone operators watching from reconnaissance feeds could see their assets vectoring away from targets, helpless to correct them once jamming began. That failure pattern is what drove the GUR Maritime Drone Division to rebuild their guidance architecture from scratch. Which weapon system proved most decisive in this operation? The Magura V5 drone platform, the algorithmic targeting software, or the optical terminal guidance package? Comment below with your analysis. The engineering effort that produced Operation Silent Azov began in October 2025, according to Ukrainian defense industry sources. The core problem was clear. If GPS spoofing could defeat navigation, navigation could not depend on GPS alone. GUR engineers worked alongside Ukrainian defense technology firms and international technical advisors to develop what they internally designated the Cascade targeting architecture. The system worked in 3 sequential layers. Layer 1 was conventional GPS waypoint navigation, the same system Russia's jammers already knew how to defeat. Layer 2 was inertial navigation with optical terrain matching, using preloaded bathymetric and surface feature data to maintain positioning when GPS was disrupted. Layer 3, the decisive piece, was an optical terminal guidance package that activated within 2 kilometers of the target acquisition zone. Using vessel silhouettes extracted from satellite imagery collected over 3 months of convoy monitoring, the drones could autonomously identify and track individual vessels by hull shape, superstructure profile, and thermal signature, independent of any external signal. The algorithmic coordination layer sat above all 3 navigation modes. Rather than operating as individually commanded assets, the swarm functioned as a distributed network. Drones shared targeting data with each other via encrypted short-range radio. If one drone acquired a vessel, it broadcast the target's position, heading, and speed to the swarm. If a drone was lost to jamming or defensive fire, the remaining assets redistributed targeting assignments automatically. GUR operators at a mobile command node near Zaporizhia could monitor the swarm state but were not required to issue individual attack commands. The algorithm handled terminal engagement. This is what made Silent Azov different from every previous Ukrainian naval drone operation. Previous strikes depended on operator-in-the-loop guidance for terminal phases. That required a communications link, and communications links could be jammed. Cascade removed the human from the terminal equation. The operators could be 300 kilometers away, and the swarm would still find its targets. Stay with me, because what happens in the next 18 minutes of this operation destroys an entire convoy corridor that Russia spent 4 years building. The operational plan called for 3 separate engagement nights to avoid a single catastrophic loss if the first wave was detected and neutralized. Night 1, July 14th. Night 2, July 15th. Night 3, July 16th. Each wave would engage a portion of the convoy using assets positioned in advance along the convoy route. Pre-positioning the drones was itself a significant operation. Magura V5 platforms. Ukraine's primary maritime drone, a 5-meter fiber composite surface vessel carrying between 200 and 320 kilograms of shaped charge explosive, were transported by civilian vehicle to coastal staging points along Ukrainian-controlled Azov coastline using a combination of small boat transfers and direct beach launches. Satellite imagery shows Ukrainian forces had identified a 23-kilometer stretch of coastline where Russian radar coverage had a persistent low elevation gap, likely due to terrain masking from a coastal ridge. This gap let Ukrainian assets deploy without triggering Russian coastal surveillance alerts. 8 Magura V5 platforms were confirmed by Ukrainian sources as part of the primary strike package. 3 experimental platforms using the new Cascade guidance system and a heavier 380-kilogram warhead configuration were included as the algorithmic coordination nodes. These were the assets that would share targeting data across the swarm if GPS spoofing forced the Maguras to switch modes. Total warhead weight committed to the operation exceeded 2,300 kilograms of high explosive. GUR reconnaissance assets, a combination of fixed-wing drone platforms and a high-altitude Ukrainian military UAV, had been maintaining persistent surveillance of the Azov corridor for 4 days before launch. They had confirmed the convoy schedule. 11 vessels, departing Mariupol at 11 p.m. on July 13th, scheduled to transit the 280-kilometer corridor to the Kerch Strait over approximately 18 hours. The convoy included 2 grain tankers that Russian forces had repurposed as fuel carriers, 3 general cargo vessels loaded with what satellite imagery analysis suggested were vehicle-sized crates, 2 purpose-built military supply ships, and 4 smaller vessels serving as either escorts or light cargo runners. The Russian EW escort was confirmed, 2 Raptor patrol boats, one carrying a Pole-21 jamming system, the other equipped with what OSINT analysts assessed as a Borisogledsk-2 communications jamming complex. Both had been tracked operating with this convoy on its previous 2 runs. The Krasukha-4 system was ground-based at Anapa, approximately 120 kilometers from the corridor's midpoint. At that range, its effectiveness against small surface targets was partially degraded but still capable of GPS disruption within the convoy's immediate area. How many vessels did the algorithmic swarm strike directly in this operation? We'll have the confirmed answer at the end. But drop your guess now. Was it a 5 vessels, B8 vessels, or C all 11? 2:47 a.m., July 14th. The first wave of Ukrainian drones entered the water from their staging positions. The Cascade algorithm began its initial state assessment, processing signals intelligence on the convoy position, updating individual drone waypoints, and establishing the distributed communications mesh that would hold the swarm together through the operation. At this point, the Russian EW operators at Anapa and aboard the Raptor escorts had no indication of the incoming threat. Radar returns from small surface contacts in the Azov are routine: fishing vessels, debris, small civilian craft. The Magura V5 has a minimal radar cross-section by design, and at their operational speed of 42 knots, early detection radar return windows are narrow. The convoy was running with standard navigation lights. Their lookouts were watching the sky for drone threats, not the water surface. The first GPS spoofing activation came at 3:22 a.m. Russian EW operators aboard the escort Raptor detected Ukrainian drone signatures approximately 14 kilometers from the convoy and activated the Pole-21 jamming package, same as they had done on 3 previous occasions when Ukrainian USV threats appeared, same as they expected it to work. The Magura V5's GPS receivers registered the spoofed positioning data. Layer 1 of Cascade failed as designed. Layer 2, inertial navigation with optical terrain matching, activated automatically. The drones recalculated their positions using preloaded sea surface data, correcting for the false GPS input. Positioning error after spoof activation, less than 180 meters. The swarm continued on course. The Russian EW operators watched their screens. The drone signatures were not veering off course. This was unusual. At 3:31 a.m., the convoy had closed to within 3 kilometers of the drone swarm's forward elements. The Cascade algorithm assessed terminal guidance range as achieved and activated Layer 3, optical targeting. The experimental coordination nodes broadcast vessel silhouette matches to the Magura platforms. Each drone received a target assignment, specific hull, approach vector, impact point. What I find most striking about this sequence, going through the GUR technical briefings that have since been partially declassified, is how routine the initial phase looked on Russian screens. Their operators had seen GPS-disrupted contacts before. They had seen drones veer away. What they had never seen was a swarm that didn't veer. That held course. That accelerated. I spent time going through the available signals intelligence reporting, and one detail kept nagging at me. The Russian EW operators had approximately 90 seconds between the moment they realized jamming had failed and the moment the first drone impacted. 90 seconds to alert the convoy, wake up captains, attempt defensive maneuvers on vessels not designed for rapid maneuvering. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be. 3:33 a.m. The lead Magura V5 impacted the third vessel in the convoy formation, a general cargo ship of approximately 4,200 tons displacement. The detonation of its 280-kilogram shaped charge warhead against the hull at the waterline produced a catastrophic breach in the engine room section. Secondary explosions, consistent with cargo fuel stores, followed within 40 seconds. The vessel began listing immediately. 3 seconds later, a second Magura impacted the sixth vessel in the convoy, then a third, then a fourth. The Raptor escort captains were screaming on radio frequencies that Ukrainian intelligence was monitoring in real time from the Zaporizhia command node. The convoy was attempting to scatter. Individual captains breaking from formation, accelerating, changing headings. But the Cascade algorithm had anticipated this. As vessels changed course, the optical guidance systems on approaching drones updated their intercept vectors automatically. A moving target at sea changes heading slowly. A drone traveling at 42 knots intercepts a course change in seconds. Night 1 ended at approximately 4:15 a.m. GUR assessment. 5 vessels struck in the first wave. 2 confirmed burning with visible thermal signature from the reconnaissance UAV overhead. 1 vessel had slowed significantly. Engine room damage consistent with blast overpressure. 2 strikes assessed as direct hull penetrations with probable flooding. The first night had also revealed an unexpected complication. One of the 3 experimental Cascade coordination nodes had been lost to thermal countermeasures, a flare and smoke system deployed by one of the Raptor escorts that temporarily blinded the coordination drone's optical guidance. The drone failed to reacquire and self-destructed per protocol. The remaining 2 coordination nodes continued functioning, but the swarm's distributed targeting mesh had operated at reduced capacity for the final 6 minutes of the engagement. GUR engineers reviewed this data at 5 a.m. They had a choice: abort nights 2 and 3 pending a hardware fix, or adapt the coordination protocol to account for thermal countermeasures. Here's what strikes me about that decision. In most military organizations in 2026, a first-night loss of a coordination asset would have triggered a full operational pause. The instinct to stop, reassess, and request additional resources is built into military doctrine. The GUR Maritime Division made a different call. They rewrote the swarm's thermal countermeasure response protocol on a laptop, tested it in simulation, and confirmed it for Night 2, all within 6 hours. This wasn't supposed to work on the revised timeline, and yet it did. That kind of operational adaptation speed is what separates Ukrainian drone warfare from anything Russia has deployed at sea. July 15th, 2:58 a.m. Night 2. The surviving vessels of the convoy had anchored near the Russian-controlled coastline east of Berdyansk, requesting air cover and additional EW support. Russian military command had dispatched 2 additional EW vehicles to the coastal area, and a Ka-27 naval helicopter began patrol circuits over the anchorage. But 2 of the original 11 vessels had continued toward Kerch rather than stopping. Captains who decided moving was safer than anchoring. Ukrainian reconnaissance had tracked them. The Night 2 drone package was smaller, 4 Magura V5s and 1 coordination node. The revised thermal countermeasure protocol gave the coordination node an automatic evasion response. On detecting thermal bloom within 800 meters, the node would drop to minimum speed and execute a 90-degree bearing change before reacquiring. Simple. Effective. At 3:14 a.m., the Night 2 swarm reached acquisition range of the 2 moving vessels. The Cascade algorithm assigned 2 drones per vessel. Both vessels were struck. One, a military supply ship of approximately 3,100 tons, took a direct hit at bow and stern. The stern explosion was catastrophic, consistent with ammunition or fuel detonation in the aft storage section. The vessel went from moving to stationary to thermal bloom in under 4 minutes. Subscribe to Steel Horizon if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because what we're describing here is not theory. This is the operational reality of naval warfare in 2026. The second vessel, a grain tanker, was struck amidships. The shaped charge penetrated the hull below the waterline. The vessel took on water and began a slow list. It drifted for 14 hours before Russian salvage tugs could approach. 7 vessels struck across 2 nights. 4 confirmed burning or dead in the water. What happened next? And this is the moment that turned Operation Silent Azov from a tactical strike into a strategic statement, was the Russian response, or rather, the absence of one. The 4 remaining vessels were anchored east of Berdyansk under what their commanders believed was adequate protection. Additional Raptor patrols, additional EW coverage, air surveillance. Russian military command assessed the threat as partially neutralized. 2 attack waves depleted, Ukraine unlikely to have resources for a third. This is the calculation error that defines Russian tactical thinking throughout this conflict. The assumption that Ukrainian resources are finite in ways that mirror Russian resource accounting. Russia uses weapons in volume. Ukraine uses weapons in innovation cycles. They are different arithmetic systems. July 16th, 3:05 a.m. Night 3. 1 Cascade coordination node. 3 Magura V5s. Target, the 4 anchored vessels. GUR engineers had adjusted the approach vector based on the Ka-27 helicopter patrol pattern observed on Night 2. The helicopter was flying a roughly oval circuit at 200 meters altitude, covering the northern and eastern approaches to the anchorage. The Night 3 drones approached from the southwest, using the shadow of the Berdyansk Peninsula to minimize radar return during the final approach phase. At 3:27 a.m., the Ka-27 pilot reported radar contact with small surface signatures approaching from the southwest. He was banking to investigate when the Cascade algorithm registered proximity to the anchorage boundary and switched to optical terminal guidance. The pilot's alert to the anchored vessels came approximately 90 seconds before first impact. 3 Magura V5s impacted 3 of the 4 remaining vessels in the anchorage over a period of 47 seconds. The 4th vessel, one of the smaller cargo runners, successfully deployed a countermeasure smoke system and executed an emergency engine start, clearing the anchorage on a random heading before the 3rd drone could reacquire. It was the only vessel in the convoy to escape unharmed. Put yourself in the position of a Russian naval officer watching this unfold from the Berdyansk coastal command post. You have just watched a convoy of 11 vessels under active EW protection, with air cover, with patrol boat escorts, be systematically destroyed across 3 nights by a system you cannot jam, cannot outmaneuver, and apparently cannot predict. How do you explain that to your superiors? How do you reopen a corridor that has just been demonstrated as indefensible? The answer, as the next 72 hours showed, was you don't. The Azov corridor went completely dark. Russian cargo movement ceased on July 16th and did not resume during the surveillance period covered in this analysis. OSINT tracking of vessel movements showed the remaining Russian cargo fleet repositioning to Novorossiysk on the Black Sea, a longer, more exposed route to Crimea under the shadow of Ukrainian long-range strike capability. Transit times for critical cargo increased by an estimated 30 to 40%. And the Black Sea route placed vessels within range of Storm Shadow cruise missiles and Ukrainian naval drone operations from Odessa area staging points. The battle damage assessment released by Ukrainian General Staff 3 days after operations concluded listed 8 vessels struck directly, 4 confirmed sunk or assessed as constructive total losses, 2 heavily damaged with significant flooding, 2 damaged with repairable structural compromise, 1 vessel undamaged. Financial assessment of destroyed or damaged vessels, between $180 and $240 million. Cargo losses, military equipment, fuel, supplies, assessed at an additional $45 to $70 million. Total strategic cost to Russia, including disruption costs over the 72-hour closure, estimated at over $300 million. Ukrainian losses, 0 personnel casualties. 1 Cascade coordination node. Total material cost of the operation assessed at approximately $2 million, 80 to 1. That is the ratio of Russian losses to Ukrainian costs in Operation Silent Azov. Here is the take that will generate disagreement. Russia's failure in the Sea of Azov was not primarily a technology failure. It was an intelligence failure compounded by institutional arrogance. The GUR had been testing components of the Cascade system in smaller operations since October 2025. Russian signals intelligence should have detected the pattern. The shift from GPS-dependent to GPS-independent guidance was not secret by February 2026. Ukrainian engineers had briefed Allied defense attaches on the conceptual architecture. Russian military intelligence had access to the same open-source reporting that Western analysts were reading. They chose to assess Ukrainian capability through the lens of what Ukraine had done, rather than what Ukraine was developing. That assessment was wrong, and 11 vessels paid for it. The intercepted Russian naval communications from Night 1, partially released by Ukrainian intelligence, show something more telling than tactical confusion. They show disbelief. Operators reporting that jamming was active but not effective. Commanders demanding confirmation that EW systems were functioning. An exchange in which a Raptor captain asks his EW officer whether Ukrainian drones could be operating without GPS. And the EW officer responds that this is not assessed as technically probable. It was technically probable. It was operational. It was running at 42 knots through the Anapa jamming bubble toward 11 vessels at that exact moment. One detail from those intercepts has stayed with me. After the first impacts, a Russian cargo vessel captain broadcasts on distress frequency, "They found us. They found all of us. Not, we are under attack. They found us." As if the convoy had believed, until that moment, that being invisible to GPS-dependent guidance was the same as being safe. In a jammed environment, they had been invisible to conventional drone navigation, and they had still been found. Because Ukraine had built an eye that didn't need satellites. What do you think? Did Russia's reliance on GPS jamming as their primary naval defense create an institutional blind spot that made this kind of defeat inevitable? Drop your analysis in the comments. This speaks to something larger about how Ukraine wages this war. Ukrainian military innovation is not solely a product of Western weapon deliveries, though those deliveries matter. HIMARS changed Ukrainian strike depth. Storm Shadow opened up Russian command infrastructure to deep strike. But algorithmic drone swarm coordination was not a Western weapon delivered to Ukraine. It was a Ukrainian invention built under operational pressure, tested in real combat conditions, and deployed with confidence built from 4 months of engineering review. That's the doctrine shift Operation Silent Azov represents. Ukraine isn't adapting to Russian capabilities after the fact. Ukraine is designing around them before the countermeasures are deployed. The question now, genuinely contested among defense analysts, is whether Russia can develop a counter to Cascade architecture guidance before Ukraine scales the system. The optical terminal guidance vulnerability is real. High-density smoke and thermal decoys in the 2-kilometer terminal zone could theoretically complicate reacquisition. The fourth vessel on Night 3 survived partly through exactly this approach. But defending every asset and every convoy with this level of active countermeasure deployment is resource-intensive, and Ukraine is continuing to iterate on Cascade. By the time Russia develops an effective response to what was deployed in July 2026, the GUR Maritime Division will likely be operating a system it can't yet counter. That iteration cycle is what makes Ukraine's drone warfare program so hard to defeat through doctrine alone. It's not a static weapon. It's a development organization operating at military tempo. If you believe tactics and engineering cycles win modern wars more than raw firepower, type Steel Horizon in the comments. The strategic consequences extended beyond the Azov corridor itself. Russian military planners monitoring the operation had to update threat assessments for the Kerch Strait Bridge, Novorossiysk harbor approaches, and every maritime logistics node in the Black Sea theater. If 11 vessels under active EW protection could be systematically struck by a swarm that navigated around jamming, what did that imply for harbor-moored vessels? For the bridge itself? Ukrainian analysts indicated the GUR had deliberately allowed elements of the Cascade targeting methodology to become apparent in post-strike analysis, specifically the optical silhouette matching capability, not as a security failure, as a deliberate signal. We can identify and destroy individual vessels by hull profile, day or night, in any EW environment. That is the message Operation Silent Azov was designed to send, beyond its immediate tactical effect. Real tactics. Real consequences. Steel Horizon. The aftermath was visible in Russian logistics patterns within 72 hours. Satellite imagery of Mariupol harbor showed cargo staging activity dropping to near zero. Vessels scheduled for the next Azov run were diverted or held at port. Russian Military Logistics Command in Rostov-on-Don reportedly convened an emergency assessment of alternative supply routes, expanded rail capacity, truck corridors, that had previously been secondary options. None matched the tonnage capacity of the Azov maritime corridor. Russian supply adequacy for Southern Front forces was assessed as degraded by approximately 22% in the immediate aftermath, with logistics pressure expected to compound over a 6 to 8 week horizon as stockpiles drew down. The timing intersected with elevated operational tempo on the southern axis, meaning Russian forces were drawing from stockpiles faster than alternative routes could replenish them. This is the operational art of maritime interdiction. You don't need to permanently close a corridor. You need to close it at the right moment, for long enough that downstream supply effects compound into operational shortfalls at the front. Ukraine hit the right moment. The Zaporizhia command node was quiet by 4 a.m. on July 16th. GUR operators had watched thermal footage of Night 3's strikes in real time. 11 vessels entered the corridor, one cleared it undamaged. The algorithm had done exactly what its engineers designed it to do. There is a line from a Ukrainian drone operator, quoted in a defense industry interview published the week after Operation Silent Azov, that I keep returning to. Asked what it felt like to watch the swarm engage autonomously, without direct operator guidance at the terminal phase, he said, "It felt like we had taught something to hunt, and then we let it go." 11 vessels. 1 corridor. 3 nights. Will Russia find an effective answer to algorithmic swarm guidance before Ukraine scales it across all maritime theaters? Comment why yes or no, because that answer shapes whether the Black Sea Fleet has any viable logistics role left by the end of this decade. The tactical lesson from Operation Silent Azov is precise. Electronic warfare dominance is not permanent dominance. Every jamming architecture has a bypass solution if the opposing force has engineering capacity and operational patience to find it. Russia spent 4 years building EW coverage over the Azov corridor and considered it a solved problem. Ukraine spent 4 months engineering around it. The lesson for every military operating in a contested EW environment is that GPS-dependent navigation is a vulnerability, not a capability. Ukraine understood this, and it built the answer. The answer to our quiz from earlier. Ukrainian algorithmic drones struck 8 of 11 vessels directly. The correct answer was B. Of 11 vessels in the convoy, only 1 escaped unharmed. That single survivor escaped through rapid deployment of thermal countermeasures and emergency engine start, responding within the window between the Ka-27 pilot's alarm and the drone's terminal reacquisition attempt. 47 seconds separated a vessel that survived from 10 that did not, was anchoring the convoy on nights 2 and 3, rather than attempting immediate dispersal. The right decision by Russian Naval Command? Could active naval aviation with anti-surface munitions have neutralized the Ukrainian swarm before terminal guidance range was achieved? And what would you have done differently as the GUAR commander on Night 1, knowing one of your 3 coordination nodes might be lost to countermeasures? Drop your tactical analysis in the comments. We read all of them. Subscribe to Steel Horizon, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The Sea of Azov is quiet again. The burned hulls have been removed or settled to the shallow bottom. But the corridor has changed. The calculus of moving cargo under EW protection through Ukrainian drone range has been permanently altered by what happened across those 3 July nights. Russian logistics planners know it. Ukrainian engineers know it. And now you know it. Silent reminders that modern warfare punishes tactical overconfidence without mercy. Stay vigilant.